It wasn't a choice she made with her mind, but with her soul. In the split second it takes for an arrow to fly, Ariana Vance, a woman of science and sorrow, threw herself in front of a stranger, an Apache warrior. She took the arrow meant for him, a debt of blood, paid in the harsh Arizona sun. She thought her act was the end of a story, a final foolish gesture of a lonely heart. She was wrong. It was the beginning. Because the next day, the warrior's father, a powerful chief, came not with gratitude, but with a shocking decision that would shatter her world and bind her fate to two brothers, two hearts and a destiny she never could have imagined. The Arizona Territory of 1878 was a land of brutal truths, written in the language of sun-bleached bone and the scarcity of water. For Ariana Vance, it was a place of deliberate exile, fleeing the ghost-filled parlors of Boston after diphtheria had claimed her father and fiancé. In the same cruel winter, she had used her inheritance to purchase a small, isolated homestead nestled in the shadow of the Dragoon Mountains. She wasn't a rancher or a prospector. She was a botanist, a student of the earth's hidden remedies. Her cabin was less a home and more a laboratory, shelves lined with meticulously labeled jars of dried herbs, tinctures, and salves. Here in the silence of the canyons, she sought a different kind of cure, one for a broken heart. Her days were a quiet ritual of discovery. She would ride her steady mare Juniper for hours, her leather satchel filled with specimen books and tools, her gaze fixed on the ground, searching for the telltale leaves of the desert marigold or the sacred root of the osha. She learned the land's rhythm, the searing breath of noon, the cool evening whisper that stirred the ocotillo, the sharp, starry clarity of the night. She learned to distinguish the call of a hawk from the cry of a coyote, the track of a javelina from that of a deer. She was a woman alone, a fact that would have sent shivers down the spine of any of her former Boston acquaintances. But Ariana had found a strange peace in her solitude. That peace was shattered on a Tuesday afternoon, under a sky the color of a robin's egg. She was tracking a rare species of night-blooming cereus along a dry wash when she heard it, not the clean crack of a settler's rifle, but the guttural shouts of men in conflict, followed by a sharp, splintering thwack. It was close, too close. Her first instinct, the Boston instinct, was to flee, to turn Juniper and ride hard for the relative safety of her cabin. But a stronger, newer instinct, one born of the territory's unforgiving honesty, held her fast. It was a cry of pain that had followed the shouts raw and human. Curiosity, or perhaps a healer's ingrained compassion, pulled her forward. Dismounting, she tethered Juniper to a hardy mesquite and crept toward the ridge of the wash, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Peering through a curtain of brittle bush, the scene below stole her breath. Two Apache warriors, impossibly large and powerful, were back to back, surrounded by at least a half-dozen other natives, not Apache. Their markings were different, their aggression more chaotic. It was an ambush. One of the Apache warriors had a bleeding gash on his arm. The other moved with a slight limp, but they fought with a terrifying, synchronized grace, their long knives flashing in the sun. They were brothers. She could see it in the shared set of their jaws, the way they moved, as one entity, anticipating the other's needs. They were magnificent and terrifying. Their assailants were falling, but the brothers were tiring their movements, becoming slower, their defenses more desperate. Then Ariana saw the archer. Hidden in the rocks on the far side, he drew his bow, the sinew creaking in the sudden silence as the last of the ambushers fell. The arrow was aimed squarely at the back of the warrior, with the injured arm who was busy finishing off his final opponent. His brother was engaged with another and couldn't see the new threat. Time seemed to warp, stretching into a thick, syrupy slowness. Ariana saw the fletching of the arrow, the tense focus of the archer, the unsuspecting back of the warrior. There was no time to shout, no time to think. There was only time to act. She scrambled down the loose gravel of the embankment, her sensible boots finding no purchase. She half ran, half fell her satchel, bumping against her hip. The archer released the string. A sharp zing cut the air. Ariana didn't know if the warrior heard her desperate cry or simply sensed the movement, but he turned just as she reached him. She shoved him hard, a surge of adrenaline, giving her unnatural strength. He stumbled back, his dark, astonished eyes locking onto hers, and then a searing, white-hot fire erupted in her left shoulder. The force of it threw her sideways into the hard-packed dirt. The world tilted, the brilliant blue sky swimming above her. She looked down and saw the impossible sight of a wooden shaft protruding from the fleshy part of her shoulder, just below the collarbone. The arrow. It had gone clean through. The world dissolved into a cacophony. The remaining brother let out a roar of fury and charged the archer. There was a brief, brutal struggle and then silence. Ariana's vision tunneled. The two giant warriors were suddenly kneeling over her. Their faces, which had been masks of savage fury moments before, were now etched with a profound, stunned confusion. The one she had saved his eyes, a deep, fathomless black, reached out a hand, then hesitated, his fingers hovering over the feathered shaft sticking out of her back. The pain was a living thing, a predator with its claws sunk deep into her flesh. Then gratefully, the world went dark. Ariana awoke to the smell of wood smoke and the soft, unfamiliar texture of a buffalo robe beneath her cheek. For a moment, she was suspended in a disoriented haze, believing she was in her own cabin, having drifted off by the hearth. Then the pain in her shoulder flared a sharp, insistent reminder, and the memories of the wash came flooding back. Her eyes snapped open. She was in her own bed, in her own cabin. The late afternoon sun streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The fire in the hearth was crackling softly. She tried to sit up, and a wave of dizziness and agony washed over her, a low groan escaping her lips. A shadow fell over her. One of the Apache warriors was there, kneeling beside her bed. It was the one with the injured arm, the one she had pushed. He was immense, his broad shoulders seeming to fill the small room. His long black hair was held back by a simple leather band, and his face in the soft light was stern, but clear of the blood and dust of the fight. He had a deep cut on his forearm, which had been crudely but effectively stitched. He held a wooden cup to her lips. "Drink," he said. The word was a low rumble, his English heavily accented but clear. The water was cool and clean, and she drank greedily. When she was finished, he set the cup down. His gaze drifted to her shoulder. She followed his look. Her dress had been cut away, and the area around her wound was clean packed with a poultice of crushed green leaves that she immediately recognized as yarrow, a plant she used herself to stop bleeding. A clean bandage torn from one of her own linen sheets was wrapped tightly around the wound. "The arrow," she whispered, her voice raspy. "Gone," he stated simply. "My brother took it out." The other warrior emerged from the shadows near the fireplace. He was slightly leaner than his brother, his features sharper, his eyes holding a restless, fiery intelligence. He held her own small, sharp, surgical knife in his hand, wiped clean. He nodded at her, a gesture of acknowledgement, not friendliness. He was the one who had limped. He still favored his right leg, but he stood tall. The situation was surreal. Two wanted Apache warriors, men who were spoken of in hushed, fearful tones in the nearby town of Tombstone, were in her home. They had undressed her, treated her wound, and built a fire in her hearth. They should have killed her or fled, leaving her to her fate. Instead, they had saved her. Why, she asked the question, directed at the one kneeling beside her. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. You took the arrow. For me, for my brother. It is a debt of blood, an honor debt. The other brother spoke, his voice sharper than his brother's. We are Kalen, he said, gesturing to his brother. And I am Taza. We are of the Chiricahua. Ariana tried to process this. Kalen and Taza. She had heard whispers of them. Sons of a prominent chief, known for their prowess in battle. To the settlers, they were phantoms murderers. To her at this moment, they were her reluctant nurses. For the next 24 hours, a strange, silent domesticity settled over the cabin. Taza, it turned out, was the more practical of the two. He found her stores of food, prepared a simple broth from her dried vegetables and jerky, and kept the fire fed. He moved with a restless energy, his eyes constantly scanning the room, the windows, as if memorizing every detail. Kalen was the guardian. He sat in the chair by her bed, rarely moving, his gaze fixed on her. It wasn't a threatening stare, but one of intense, unnerving focus. He was watching over her, but it felt like more than that. It felt like he was trying to understand her, to solve the puzzle of why a white woman would sacrifice herself for two men who were her sworn enemies. Communication was sparse and functional. They spoke only when necessary, their shared English limited. Ariana learned that their ambushers were from a rival tribe, bounty hunters, looking to collect the price on their heads. They had been tracking a mountain lion and were caught unaware. The pain in her shoulder was a constant throbbing presence. Kalen would periodically check the bandage, his large, surprisingly gentle fingers probing the edges. Once, when he was reapplying the yarrow poultice, his thumb brushed against the uninjured skin of her collarbone. A jolt, entirely separate from the pain, shot through her. It was a simple, accidental touch, but it felt charged with a strange electricity. She saw a flicker of something in his dark eyes before he masked it, his face becoming stone once more. Taza was different. He would sometimes watch her from across the room while he sharpened his knife or mended a tear in his moccasin. His gaze was curious, almost artistic. He noticed the books on her shelves, the detailed drawings of plants in her journals. Once he picked up a charcoal sketch she had made of a desert lily. He studied it for a long time, his head tilted. You see the flowers, Spirit, he said, his voice soft with surprise. He placed the drawing back on the table, as if it were a sacred object. That night a fever took hold of Ariana. The cabin spun, the shadows on the walls twisting into menacing shapes. She cried out, lost in a delirium of memory and pain, reliving the frigid Boston winter, the hollow sound of dirt on her father's coffin. Through the haze, she felt a cool cloth on her forehead. A strong arm supported her head, helping her drink a bitter, earthy tea. She heard low voices, not in English, but in the flowing, guttural cadence of the Apache language. They were arguing, their tones sharp and urgent. She surfaced from the fever briefly, her vision clearing for a moment. Kalen and Taza were standing by the hearth, locked in a tense debate. Taza gestured wildly toward her, then toward the door, his face a mask of frustration. Kalen stood like a mountain, his arms crossed, shaking his head slowly, his voice a low, resolute rumble. He was refusing to leave. Her last coherent thought, before the fever pulled her under again, was one of profound bewilderment. They were arguing about her. They were risking their lives staying in this exposed cabin for a woman they did not know. The debt of blood, as Kalen had called it, was a bond far stronger and more complex than she could ever have comprehended. She had saved one of their lives, and in doing so had irrevocably entangled hers with theirs. As she drifted into unconsciousness, she felt a hand large and calloused gently brush the hair from her damp forehead. The fever broke with the dawn. Ariana awoke, feeling weak and scoured out, but her mind was clear for the first time in what felt like days. The pain in her shoulder had subsided to a dull, manageable ache. Kalen was asleep in the chair beside her, his head slumped to his chest, his powerful form looking strangely vulnerable in repose. Taza was nowhere to be seen. The cabin door creaked open, and Taza entered, carrying a rabbit he had evidently just hunted. He stopped when he saw her eyes were open, and a look of relief washed over his sharp features. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, and set about preparing the meat. The quiet was broken an hour later. It wasn't a sound that alerted them, but a shift in the air, a sudden tension. Kalen came awake instantly, moving from slumber to full alertness in a single fluid motion. He was on his feet, knife in hand, his body a coiled spring. Taza froze his hand, hovering over the rabbit. Ariana's heart leapt into her throat. Through her window she saw them. At least 20 Apache warriors on horseback, materializing from the landscape, as if conjured from the dust itself. They formed a silent, menacing semicircle around her small cabin. They were not a war party. They carried lances and bows, but their demeanor was one of somber purpose. At their head sat a man who could only be their leader. He was older, his face a stunning roadmap of deep lines, his long grey streaked hair flowing over his shoulders. He sat on his war pony with an air of absolute authority, a king in his own domain. Our father Kalen murmured, his voice tight. Chief Mangus. The name was a legend in the territory, a name that struck fear into the hearts of soldiers and settlers alike. He was known as a brilliant strategist and a fierce protector of his people, a man who had never bowed to the white man's treaties. And he was at her door. Kalen and Taza went outside. They did not walk like men expecting a warm welcome. They walked like sons about to face judgment. Ariana, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and weakness, pulled a blanket around her shoulders and struggled to her feet. She had to see. Leaning against the doorframe, she watched the scene unfold. Kalen and Taza stood before their father, their heads bowed slightly in respect. Chief Mangus did not speak for a long time. His eyes, dark and piercing, surveyed the scene, his two sons bruised and battered, but alive. Ariana's small, defiant cabin standing in his territory, the tracks in the dirt telling the story of the fight. Finally, his gaze fell on his sons. He spoke in the Apache tongue, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. It was not the voice of a gentle father, but of a chieftain, demanding an accounting. Taza spoke first, his words coming in a rush, gesturing back toward the wash where the ambush had occurred. Kalen added his own words, his voice low, and even his account seeming to carry more weight. As he spoke, he turned and pointed a single definitive finger at Ariana, who flinched in the doorway. Chief Mangus's gaze shifted to her. It was the most intense scrutiny she had ever experienced. It felt as though he were seeing not just the woman in the doorway, but the entirety of her soul, her grief, her loneliness, her fear, her stubborn will to survive. He saw the makeshift bandage on her shoulder, the paleness of her face, and the defiance in her eyes. He dismounted his movements, fluid and regal, despite his age. He walked slowly toward the cabin, his warriors remaining mounted and silent, watching the unfolding drama. He stopped a few feet from her, his presence overwhelming. He was close enough now that she could see the silver in his hair, the intricate beadwork on his buckskin shirt, the wisdom and hardness in his eyes. He looked from her to Kalen, then to Tarza. He examined the wound on Kaelin's arm and the gash on Tarza's leg. He then looked back at Ariana's bandaged shoulder. He understood. He spoke, and this time it was in English, his words carefully chosen as if they were foreign objects in his mouth. "You are the white woman healer, the one who talks to plants." Ariana was stunned. How could he know this? He had been watching her. The realization sent a chill down her spine. Her cherished solitude had been an illusion. "I am," she managed her voice, barely a whisper. "My sons live," he said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. "They say you took an arrow meant for Kaelin, that your blood was spilled to save his. It was a reaction. I didn't think." "You acted," he corrected her, his voice stern. "An act of honor, an act of sacrifice. Among my people, such a debt cannot be ignored. It cannot be repaid with trinkets or thanks. A life for a life. You saved the life of a future chief. You preserved my bloodline." He paused, his eyes boring into her. Ariana felt a terrible premonition, a sense that the world was about to pivot on its axis. "The law of our people is clear," Chief Mangus declared, his voice rising so all his warriors could hear. "You have spilled your blood for the Chiricahua. You have proven your spirit is stronger than your skin is white. Your life is now tied to the lives you saved. You have saved my 2 sons, and therefore you will be wife to my 2 sons. The words struck Ariana with the force of a physical blow. She stared at him, uncomprehending. "Wife too." To both of them, laughter sharp and hysterical bubbled in her throat. That's impossible. It's madness." She looked at Kaelin and Tarza. Tarza looked as shocked as she felt his mouth slightly agape. But Kaelin's face was a mask of stoic acceptance. He had known this was a possibility. He had known the weight of their laws. "It is not madness. It is our way," the chief said, his voice cold, devoid of any room for argument. "It is a matter of honor. Kaelin and Tarza will share the responsibility of protecting you. They will share the honor of being your husband. You will become one of us. You will be a mother to the next generation of our people." "No," Ariana said, the word coming out stronger than she expected. "No. I thank you for your sentiment. But I cannot. I will not. My life is my own." Chief Mangus's expression hardened. The lines around his eyes deepened, and the warmth, what little there had been, vanished, replaced by the unyielding will of a leader who had never been defied. "You think you have a choice?" he asked, his voice soft and deadly. "The debt has been paid in your blood. The decision has been made. It is not a request." He turned without another word, his back straight and proud, and walked back to his horse. He mounted in a single, smooth motion. "Prepare her," he commanded his sons in their own language. "She rides with us." Ariana stood in the doorway, the world reeling around her. The silent warrior's, Kaelin's unreadable face, Tarza's stunned disbelief. Just yesterday, she had been a lonely botanist, seeking solace in the quiet rhythms of the desert. Now, by the decree of an Apache chief, she was the intended bride of 2 warriors, her life no longer her own. The shocking decision had been delivered, and it was not a proposition. It was a sentence. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through Ariana's shock. She backed into a cabin, her mind racing. This couldn't be happening. It was a barbaric custom, a misunderstanding. She looked wildly at Kaelin and Tarza, who had followed her inside their massive frames, dwarfing the small space. "You can't let him do this," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "Tell him it's wrong. In my world, a woman marries one man. One, and out of love, not..." not as payment for a debt. Tarza ran a hand through his hair in a gesture of pure frustration. Our father's word is law, woman. To defy him is to be cast out. The decision is made from honor. To him it is the greatest gift he can offer you, the protection of his name, his sons. It's not a gift, it's a cage, she shot back. Kaelin remained silent, his gaze heavy. He watched her not with pity, but with a kind of grim understanding. He knew better than Tarza the chasm that lay between their worlds. There is no other way, Kaelin said, his voice low and final. His mind is set. Just then a new sound intruded, the steady clopping of a shod horse, a sound distinctly different from the unshod ponies of the Apache. A voice called out, laced with a smug familiarity that made Ariana's skin crawl. Miss Vance. You in there saw some commotion from my ridge. Figured I'd check you weren't being bothered by any red vermin. Silas Croft. Her nearest neighbor, if you could call a man who lived 5 miles away a neighbor. Croft was a rancher with a sprawling property and an even bigger ambition. He had made no secret of his desire to acquire her land with its valuable spring. His offers had started as polite inquiries and had steadily grown more menacing. He was a corpulent, florid man with small, predatory eyes and a belief that the only good Apache was a dead one. Kaelin and Tarza instantly flattened themselves against the wall out of sight of the window, their knives appearing in their hands, as if by magic. The change in them was terrifying. They went from men to predators in a heartbeat. Ariana's mind worked frantically. If Croft saw the Apache, he would ride for Tombstone and return with a posse. A massacre would ensue. Her cabin would be the epicenter of it. But if he saw her disheveled with a wounded shoulder, what would he think? Kaelin breathed his voice, a whisper of command by her ear. Send him away. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, Ariana walked to the door, pulling her blanket tighter to hide her bandaged shoulder and the cut dress beneath. She stepped outside, blinking in the bright sun, forcing a weak smile. Silas Croft sat on his big bay horse, a Winchester rifle resting across his saddle. His piggish eyes raked over her, noting her pale face and the way she held herself stiffly. Croft, she said, her voice tight. Everything is fine. Just a fall from my horse. His eyes narrowed with suspicion. A fall I heard shouts yesterday. Sounded like a war cry. He gestured with his chin toward the ground. And I see a hell of a lot of pony tracks here. You entertaining guests, Miss Vance, migrant workers. She lied quickly, her heart pounding. Some Paiute looking for day labor. They've already moved on. Croft grunted, not believing her for a second. His gaze lingered on the cabin door, as if he could sense the powerful presence of the men inside. You know a lone woman like you. It's not safe out here. Things happen. Fires start. Wells get poisoned. An Apache arrow can find its way to you just as easily as a fall from a horse. It was a veiled threat, ugly and clear. My offer for this land still stands. It'd be a shame if something were to happen to you before you could accept it. Rage, pure and hot, burned through Ariana's fear. Is that a threat, Mr. Croft? He gave her a slow, rotten smile. It's friendly advice, Mum. This is hard country. It has a way of swallowing up people who don't belong. He spat a stream of tobacco juice near her boots. I'll be back. You think on it? With a final lingering look of suspicion, he wheeled his horse around and trotted away. The moment he was out of sight, Ariana sagged against the cabin wall, her legs trembling. Kaelin was beside her in an instant. What did he say? He wants my land. He threatened me. He knows something is wrong. She looked from Kaelin to the waiting Apache party, then back at her small, vulnerable cabin. A devastating realization dawned on her. Croft was right. She couldn't stay here. Not anymore. Whether she went with the Apache or not, Croft would be back. He would find a reason to run her off, or worse. Her solitary peace was gone forever. Chief Mangas had left her no choice, but Silas Croft had just stripped away any alternative. She was caught between two implacable forces, the honor-bound laws of the Apache and the greedy, lawless ambition of the white settlers. Of the two, she suddenly knew with chilling certainty which was the more dangerous. Croft saw her as an obstacle. Mangas, in his own severe way, saw her as something precious. She turned to Kaelin, a new desperate plan forming in her mind. "I will go with you," she said, her voice shaking but firm. The brothers looked at her in surprise. "But not as a wife." "Not yet. I will go as your healer. Your tribe must have sick and wounded. I have skills. I can help your people. Let me prove my worth to you not as a prize, but as a person. Let me earn my place." It was a long shot, a desperate appeal to their reason over their father's decree. She was proposing a bargain, a delay of the inevitable, hoping that in time she could find a way out. Taza looked intrigued. A healer for the people. Father might listen to that. It brings honor. Kaelin's expression was harder to read. He looked at her then toward the trail Croft had taken. He understood her predicament perfectly. To stay was to face Croft. To refuse his father was to be left to face Croft alone. Her proposal was the only path that offered survival. "I will speak to my father," Kaelin said. He strode out to Chief Mangas, who had been watching the entire exchange with Croft from a distance. Their conversation was long and animated. Ariana watched her entire future, hanging on the gestures and tones of men whose language she could not understand. She saw Mangas look at her, his face grim. She saw Kaelin argue his stance, resolute. Finally, Kaelin returned. The entire Apache party had turned their horses to face them, awaiting the outcome. "He agrees," Kaelin announced, his voice flat. "For now, you will come with us as our healer. You will be given a lodge, and you will be under my protection and the protection of Taza. You will tend to our people, but the debt of blood remains. You will still be expected to choose. In time." It wasn't freedom, but it was a reprieve. A bitter, terrifying bargain had been struck. Ariana looked around her small cabin at the life she had painstakingly built from the ashes of her old one. Her books, her plants, her quiet solitude, all of it was about to be left behind. Taza gently took her arm. "We must go." Now, with a heavy heart, Ariana gathered a small bundle, her medical bag with its precious salves and surgical tools, a few changes of clothes, and the small leather-bound journal filled with her botanical drawings. As she took one last look at her home, she knew she was crossing a threshold from which there would be no return. She was leaving the world she knew and stepping into the heart of the one she had only ever seen from a safe and frightened distance. The journey to the Chiricahua stronghold was a grueling ordeal. They traveled fast, moving through hidden canyons and steep mountain passes that Ariana never knew existed. Her shoulder throbbed with every jolt of the horse she was given, a gentle mare that seemed to sense her fragility. If she had been alone, she would have been lost and dead within a day. But she was surrounded by the Apache, who moved through the treacherous landscape with the ease of ghosts. Their camp, when they finally reached it, was a breathtaking surprise. It was not the squalid, disordered collection of huts she had read about in sensationalist Eastern papers. Nestled in a high, hidden valley, shielded by soaring rock walls, and watered by a clear, cold stream, it was a vibrant, functioning community. Wickiup's domed structures of willow branches and hides were scattered amongst the cottonwood trees. The air smelled of pinon smoke, roasting meat, and the clean scent of pine. Children played their laughter echoing off the canyon walls, while women worked hides, wove baskets, and tended to cooking fires. Ariana's arrival caused an immediate stir. She was a white woman, the enemy brought into the heart of their sanctuary. She felt hundreds of eyes on her, suspicious, hostile, and intensely curious. Chief Mangas silenced the murmuring with a single sharp command. She was given a small wickiup near the stream, slightly apart from the main family clusters. Kaelin and Tarza's family wickiup was nearby, and it was made clear that she was under their watch. The first few days were a blur of overwhelming strangeness and profound isolation. The language was a barrier as solid as the canyon walls. The customs were alien. She felt like a specimen under a microscope, observed and judged by all. An elderly woman named Nalin, the tribe's current healer, was particularly wary. Nalin was a formidable presence, her face a web of wrinkles, her eyes sharp with a lifetime of wisdom and skepticism. She saw Oriana and her little black bag of white man's medicine as a threat to her authority and her traditions. Ariana knew she had to prove Kaelin's bargain was a worthy one. Her opportunity came a few days later, when a young boy playing on the rocks took a nasty fall, gashing his leg open to the bone. Nalin was summoned and began to chant, preparing a poultice of mud and herbs. But the wound was deep, the bleeding profuse and arterial. The boy was pale, his eyes wide with shock and fear. Ariana knew he was at risk of bleeding to death. With her heart in her throat, she approached. "Let me help," she said to Nalin, her voice steady. Nalin glared at her, but the boy's mother, desperate, nodded for Ariana to proceed. Pushing aside her fear, Ariana went to work. She opened her medical bag, her hands moving with a surgeon's precision. She used carbolic acid to clean the wound, a shocking and foreign act to the onlookers. Using her suturing needles and fine catgut, she began to stitch the gaping wound, closed layer by layer. The Apache, who were accustomed to packing wounds and letting them heal from the inside out, watched in stunned silence. Tarza stood guard over her, his hand on his knife, warding off the most suspicious onlookers. Kaelin watched from a distance, his expression unreadable, but his presence a solid wall of support. When she was finished, she bandaged the leg tightly with clean linen. "Keep him warm," she told the mother. "Do not let him walk on it for a week. The stitches will hold the skin together, so it can heal without a deep scar." The boy survived. Within 2 weeks, he was hobbling around camp, and when Ariana removed the stitches, the wound had healed into a clean pink line, instead of the ragged, puckered scar they were used to. That single act changed everything. It did not erase their suspicion, but it planted a seed of respect. They began to call her the Weaver of Leaves, a title that acknowledged both her botanical knowledge and her skill with a needle. Women would shyly approach her with their sick children. Warriors would come to her to have wounds from hunts or old battles cleaned and properly tended. She never challenged Nalin's authority, often asking the old woman for her knowledge of local plants, blending her scientific methods with the tribe's ancient wisdom. Slowly, a grudging respect formed between the two healers. During this time, her relationship with the two brothers deepened, but in vastly different ways. Tarza was her friend, her window into the Apache soul. He was a dreamer and an artist. He would bring her wildflowers, telling her their Apache names and the legends associated with them. He showed her his drawings etched onto tanned hides, vivid depictions of hunts, ceremonies, and mythological creatures. He taught her his language, patiently correcting her pronunciation, laughing with genuine delight when she mastered a new phrase. With Tarza, she could almost forget her predicament. They would talk for hours by the stream, and she found herself confiding in him about her life in Boston, her love of books, and the grief that had driven her west. He listened with an artist's empathy, his fiery eyes softening with understanding. Kaelan was a different matter entirely. He was a silent, looming presence, a guardian shadow. He did not engage in long conversations. His instruction was in the practicalities of survival. He taught her how to find water, how to read the signs of the weather in the clouds, how to move silently through the brush. He would leave a brace of quail or a piece of venison outside her wickiup in the morning without a word. One evening, as she was grinding herbs outside her lodge, he approached and sat down across from her. He watched her work for a long time, the silence stretching between them, comfortable rather than awkward. "You're not afraid," he stated. "I am terrified every single day," she confessed without looking up from her mortar and pestle. "But your hands are steady," he observed. "Your spirit does not tremble. It is strong, like the mountain oak." She looked up surprised by his poetic turn of phrase. His gaze was fixed on her, and for the first time she saw past the stoic warrior. She saw a profound loneliness in his eyes, the weight of a future chief, the burden of his people's survival resting on his broad shoulders. In that moment, she felt an unexpected and powerful connection to him, a kinship of spirits who carried heavy burdens. The love triangle the chief had decreed was no longer a theoretical problem. It was becoming her reality. She was drawn to Tarza's warmth, his laughter, his artistic soul that mirrored her own scholarly passions. But she was also drawn to Kaelan's quiet strength, his unwavering dependability, the sense of absolute safety she felt when he was near. Her heart was being pulled in two different directions, an impossible choice, looming in a future she could no longer control. The women of the tribe began to notice. They saw the way Tarza's eyes lit up when Ariana smiled, and they saw the way Kaelan's gaze followed her wherever she went. They began to whisper, to wonder. The white woman healer had proven her worth. Now the debt of honor had to be settled. The chief was watching, and soon he would demand that she make the choice he had promised. The fragile peace of the Chiricahua stronghold was not destined to last. Silas Croft, the greedy rancher, whose threats had driven Ariana from her home, had not forgotten her. Finding her cabin abandoned, he spun a venomous tale in Tombstone of a gentle white woman abducted by savages. It was the perfect pretext to rally a posse of vigilantes men drawn by prejudice and the promise of plunder to achieve his twin goals, eradicating the local Apache and seizing Ariana's valuable land in the name of rescuing her. Guided by a skilled tracker, Croft's mob descended upon the hidden valley at dawn. The morning calm was ripped apart by a volley of rifle fire, a storm of lead that tore through the sleeping camp. Chaos erupted. Warriors caught by surprise grabbed their weapons to mount a desperate defense for their homes and families. Ariana was thrown into a world of primal fear. Tarza appeared at her side instantly, shoving her behind a cluster of boulders. "Stay down!" he commanded, his face a mask of cold fury before he vanished into the fray. Crouched and trembling, Ariana watched the horror unfold. Croft's men were not soldiers, they were a firing squad, cutting down anyone in their path. The sight of their brutality of the people she had come to know falling ignited a rage that burned away her terror. She was not a warrior, but she was a healer, and her people were dying. Clutching her medical bag, she scrambled from her cover, moving in a low crouch toward the heart of the fighting. She ignored the bullets that hissed past her head. Her focus narrowed to the wounded. She found Narlin, the old healer, trying to drag a wounded child to safety, when one of Croft's men bore down on them, his rifle raised. In a flash, Tarza intercepted him, a whirlwind of motion. that ended with the attacker on the ground. But as Tarza rose, another rifle cracked. He cried out and spun, clutching his chest before collapsing in the dust. For Ariana, the world stopped. The battle faded into a dull roar as she ran to his side, oblivious to the danger. She fell to her knees beside him, seeing the terrible bubbling wound. A sucking chest wound. His lungs were filling with blood and air. He was drowning. Kalen was suddenly there, a towering guardian, shielding them with his own body, his knife dispatching the man who had shot his brother. His face was a terrifying mask of grief and rage. He moved to lift Tarza, but Ariana's voice, sharp with authority, stopped him cold. "No, don't move him. You'll kill him," she commanded. Her eyes, burning with a surgeon's intensity, met his. "His lung is punctured. I need a hollow reed from the stream and a clean piece of supple leather." Now, Kalen, stunned by her forcefulness, the future chief did not hesitate. He relayed the order and stood over them, a vengeful sentinel, while Ariana worked with frantic precision. Tarza's breathing grew shallow, his eyes wide with pain. "Hush, Tarza." She soothed her hands a blur as she sterilized the area. The items arrived, and she fashioned a one-way flutter valve from the leather, a desperate, almost impossible field procedure she had only read about in medical texts. Making a tiny, precise incision between his ribs, she inserted the reed, releasing the trapped air from his chest cavity. She sealed the wound with her makeshift valve. Tarza coughed violently, and then miraculously took a deep, ragged breath. The color began to seep back into his face. At that moment, Kalen looked down at Ariana, covered in his brother's blood, her face a study in fierce concentration, and saw not a white woman, but a spirit of immense power and courage. The Apache, enraged by the attack on their families, had turned the tide. Their desperate fury was more than the posse had bargained for. Croft, seeing his men falling, lost his nerve and called a retreat. In the sudden echoing silence, the camp was a scene of devastation. Chief Mangas stood amidst the ruin, his gaze landing on the tableau by the fire, Ariana still holding his wounded son's hand, and Kalen standing guard, his expression one of staggering awe. The days that followed were somber, filled with mourning. Yet Ariana's role had been irrevocably transformed. She was no longer an outsider. She was the weaver of lives. She worked tirelessly, her skills saving many who would have otherwise been lost. Tarza's recovery was a testament to her knowledge, and in their shared vigil, she and the tribal healer Narlin formed a bond of mutual respect. Kalen's silent protection became a constant, comforting presence. His quiet actions, bringing her food, watching over her lodge, spoke a language of devotion she now understood perfectly. A week after the raid, Chief Mangas summoned her to his lodge. Kalen and a recovering Tarza were present, the atmosphere thick with unspoken significance. Weaver of lives, the chief began, his voice heavy with emotion. "I once sought to bind you to my family with law to settle a debt of blood. I was a fool. A person's place is not given by decree. It is earned. You have bled with our warriors and healed our children. You are Chiricahua in your spirit, a truth that runs deeper than any law." He looked at her, his old eyes filled with a new wisdom. "My command was a cage. I release you from it. The debt is paid. You are free to leave us and return to your world. Or you are free to stay." Ariana's heart hammered in her chest. The freedom she had once craved now felt like a potential exile. Her gaze fell on Tarza, who met her look with a warm, grateful smile. Ariana Tarza said, his voice still weak but firm, "My life is a gift from you, and my heart is yours in friendship for all my days. I would have been honored to call you wife. But in the battle I saw the truth. I saw where your heart finds its shield." He turned his gaze to his brother. I will not stand between my brother and his own heart." All eyes fell on Calen. He remained silent, but his soul was in his gaze, an offering not a demand. The final choice Ariana realized was not between two men, but between two lives, the ghost of a life she'd left behind in Boston, and the vibrant, dangerous, and deeply meaningful one she had found here. She looked at the proud chief, at the generous artist she had saved, and finally at the stoic warrior who had become her anchor. Her past was a faded photograph. This was her living, breathing reality. "I will stay," she said, her voice clear and unwavering in the quiet lodge. Her gaze locked with Calen's, and for the first time, a genuine smile touched her lips. "My path is here, with my people, and with you, if you will have me." A powerful light dawned in Calen's dark eyes, chasing away the shadows of a lifetime of solitude and duty. He did not speak. He simply reached out and took her hand, his large, calloused fingers closing around hers in a silent promise. It was not the end of a debt, but the beginning of a destiny, one she would face, not as a captive, but as a queen in a warrior's heart. Ariana's story is a powerful testament to the fact that our true path is often found not in the lives we plan, but in the courageous choices we make in the most desperate of moments. She threw herself in front of an arrow to save a stranger, and in doing so, she saved herself from a life of quiet grief. Her journey from a lonely healer to a revered member of a warrior nation shows us that family is not always the one we are born into, but the one we forge in the fires of loyalty and love. It's a reminder that courage has no single language, and the heart can find a home in the most unexpected of places. If this story of bravery, sacrifice, and forbidden love in the Old West moved you, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a powerful story, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more tales of history, heart, and the untamed human spirit. What part of Ariana's journey surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments below.